Very good points, Myroslava, and thanks. And Peter, China, what are you thinking? And China imports a lot of grain and participants. Ukraine is one of the world's 5 largest food powers as measured in internationally traded food, largely grains and sunflower oil. But they get a lot of iron pellets from Ukraine since they have problems, the Chinese have problems with Australia. That said, I think Taiwan has all of a sudden elevated Ukraine to the A list in that people realize that if Ukraine, that if the US, the West steps on the ball with Ukraine, it's a green light for China to take Taiwan, to be blunt. And I think that message has gotten through to the people in the Biden administration, Boris Johnson, and hopefully to people in Germany and France. Peter, China, what do you think, how do you think China is going to play it in the next few days and weeks?
I don't anticipate they'll be very involved, frankly. I think that they are fundamentally against any drama in general in terms of international relations. I think they are perhaps the ultimate stability state. They've spoken about the need to respect international borders. They've always paid lip service to that, even going back to 2014 rather. But having said that, they've also abstained or voted with Russia at the UN. Their relationship with Russia is very important. I think that's much more important for China than their relationship with Ukraine. So they will not upset that for Ukraine or for the West or for a respect for international relations. So I think they'll stand down. I don't think they'll get very involved. The economic relationship between China and Ukraine is significant, though. I think specifically because it's a food relationship. I think China is, Ukraine is playing a more prominent role in China's food security, and that's interesting in itself. And China has also begun to invest more in Ukraine in terms of infrastructure, in terms of putting down longer routes. And Chinese planning tends to be of a very long-term nature. And so I think it's reasonable to say that China now views Ukraine as a partner, both in terms of agriculture and food security, and also in terms of infrastructure and trade ties with the EU, with Europe, essentially, as a platform, as a transit country for trade with the EU. So they're not totally indifferent, but I wouldn't expect them to get directly involved. I think if we talk about the economic factors here, Ukraine's role as a food producer, I like to refer to Ukraine as an emerging agricultural superpower, because I like these tabloid terms to sort of capture the imagination of outside audiences. But I think that's a very relevant term. I think they are genuinely. Yeah. The figures reflect that. It needs to be understood internationally how big Ukraine is. It's in the top 5 in a whole row of key agricultural categories as an exporter. It's the number 4 exporter to the EU. So if Ukraine were to be, plunged into a very large military campaign, and that trade, or a blockade, and that trade were to be stopped, the consequences would be considerable around the world. They'd be feeling that in a lot of countries would all of a sudden see, 20% of their grain or 30% of their sunflower or whatever it may be would be gone, and that would have a huge knock-on effect. It would cause food shortages, it would cause price hikes, and it would lead to instability. That could be a factor across North Africa, the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be, and then that has a knock-on effect in terms of the potential to spark migration waves coming into the EU, et cetera. So, the butterfly effect of Ukraine being blockaded or disrupted could be very significant. China's part of that, but I don't think it's perhaps the main thing. I think that we need to look elsewhere for the keys to that, and it would be very significant. And to be honest, we have seen articles about this in the last few weeks in the press. This is something that thankfully people seem to be more aware of, and they're starting to say in advance, this is what it could mean. Whereas during previous crises, there seems to have been a much less awareness of that sort of thing.
Yeah, the World Food Program tracks world food prices, and they've been up in the last few years. And, a country like Egypt, which depends heavily on Black Sea grain, largely from Ukraine,
Yeah.
They get very sensitive to the price of wheat going up and price of bread going up. India is the largest importer of sunflower oil and sunflower seed, and Ukraine is the largest exporter. These are very sensitive to the common people in India. So I agree with you that there is a real sensitivity there. And we know why the Nazis invaded Ukraine is because of the Black Earth, because they wanted to get the grain, the bread basket of Europe.